From out front, Stanton House Inn looks like a pretty straightforward old house. Columns, symmetry, a plaque by the door with a name on it that isn't ours. And that's the thing most people get wrong about it. It isn't one house from one neat era that somebody kept under glass. It's the same address, rebuilt and repurposed over and over. And if you know where to look, you can see most of those versions all at once. If you don't know who I am, my name is Colin Pearson. I'm a fourth-generation innkeeper at Stanton House Inn in Greenwich, Connecticut. This is the history of the house. Let me show you the parts of it most people walk straight past. Start with what you can actually read. The oldest version of the house is right at the front, built in 1843. Greek Revival. The columns, the balance left and right, the way the front faces almost a mirror of itself. That isn't something we added later. That's the original house, still doing its thing. Before there was a house here at all, this was all farmland. A big farm going back to the early 1700s on land tied to a Reverend Sackett, who ran the church right next door. The arrangement was simple. The family lived here, worked the land, and looked after the congregation at next door, Second Congregational Church. I call them a dynasty of reverends because for about 150 years, that's more or less what they were. So the first thing this house ever was a parsonage with a farm attached. I walked past the plaque at the front for years before I bothered to learn what it actually meant. It doesn't say Stanton House. It says the Seaman Brush House. Guests ask me about this all the time. Here's the short version. The Sackett line eventually ran through a daughter who'd married a man named Seaman. The Seamans held the house until the very end of the 1890s. Then they sold it to the Brush family, who were the kind of name where once you start noticing it, shows up all over Greenwich. The library, the hospital, schools. Two families, one sale, and the name stuck. We came along much later, and we kept the old name on the front because the old name is the honest one. Inside is where the house drops the farmhouse facade entirely. Right after the Brushes bought the place, around 1900, they paid for a serious renovation, and the architect they hired was Stanford White. If you're into turn-of-the-century American architecture, it's a big name. His firm, McKim, Mead & White, shaped a lot of how this country's grand buildings look. White was the one of the three who really gravitated toward residential houses. What he left here is mostly in the details, and the best proof is right in front of you. The fireplaces are his. You'll find them down here in the public rooms and in several of the bedrooms upstairs. When a guest tells me a room feels a certain way and they can't quite figure out why, it's usually one of these doing all the work. Hey, real quick, if any of this sounds good to you, click the link in the description for a free visitor's guide to Greenwich, Connecticut. White also has one of the wilder biographies in American architecture. He was shot and killed in 1906 inside a building he designed by the jealous husband of a woman he'd been involved with. It's a story that's got murder, money, and New York society behaving badly, so naturally it's the one part of this house's story we don't have time for today. What matters in the front of the house is that he changed how the house feels, and you are standing in the proof. The other thing that renovation did was make the house bigger. The original plan was tight and formal. Rooms off a central hall, balanced, a little rigid. You can still feel that older bone structure at the front. One of our rooms actually sits in what used to be the porte cochere, the covered spot where a carriage could pull up so nobody got rained on between the door and the horses, which tells you something about how people used to arrive here. That's why the front of the house feels like one century and the back feels like another, because it is. You walk from the 1840s into the 1900s in about 30 feet, and most people never notice. For most of its life, this was a private home. Wealthy families, full staff, the whole 9 yards. That ended in the stock market crash of 1929. The family living here lost the house afterwards, handed the keys back to the bank, and just walked away. And then, for the better part of a decade, this whole place just sat empty. No guests, no family breakfast, nobody arguing about where to put another side table. Just a big house waiting for its next use. That's kind of the hinge of the story. Everything before it is a private home. Everything after it is the version we actually run today. Which brings me to my favorite person in the story. In 1937, a woman named Nora Stanton Barney bought the empty house. She's the reason it's called Stanton House. Her grandmother was Elizabeth Cady Stanton of the women's suffrage movement. But Nora is interesting in her own right. She was the first woman to earn a civil engineering degree from Cornell. She also divorced her first husband because he wanted her to quit working and stay home in the 1920s. She was not going to let anyone tell her what to do. She bought this house to run as a hotel for people coming up from New York. There was only one problem. It was zoned residential. So in the meantime, she opened it as a housing for veterans, because who was going to argue with housing veterans? The story that gets told in town is that she then got herself onto the planning and zoning board, and when the town needed a rezoning of its own for a new school, she sat on their paperwork until they agreed to let her run her hotel. When you're here, take a look up at the fire escapes. They look like they belong on a ship, not a house. The story I was told is that Nora's engineering work ran toward the nautical side of things, and she knew the right person to get them cheap. I can't exactly prove my theory, of course, but it's exactly the kind of thing she would have done. Whatever the details, she's the reason this stopped being somebody's private home and started being a place you could book a room. For about 25 years, Nora's hotel was one of the good ones in town. Then it slid. After her era, the house became a boarding house. The real local word for what it turned into was a flop house, which is not something you want to put on a brochure. For a while, this was where people wound up in Greenwich when they were out of other options, if you will. People who grew up in town still remember it as a place you didn't go. And yes, my own family was connected to the house during that rough stretch. It's not the chapter we're proudest of, but it's real, and leaving it out would make the rest of the story a little bit of a lie. You can see the decline in some places. This used to be a much larger property. It ran all the way to the next street over, with a garden terrace and full-time gardeners. The ruins out back are what's left of it. When a house stops being looked after, the edges usually go first. And then, in 1985, my parents, Tog and Doreen, decided this house deserved better than its reputation. They started turning a flop house back into somewhere you'd actually want to spend the night. That's when Stanton House Inn was born. There's a photo of my dad from back then with a full head of hair, and one next to it where 30 years of running this place have taken care of that. I'm told I look like him. I don't see it. So here's where we are today. This house has been a farm, a parsonage, a Gilded Age residence, an empty shell, veterans housing, a hotel, a flop house, and now an inn. People expect a historic house to be one frozen moment kept perfectly still. This one never had that luxury. Instead, it got inherited, altered, neglected, rescued, marinated, and eventually loved back into shape. And it kept ending up useful. If you're ever staying with us, that's the part I want you to feel. Not that the house is old. Plenty of houses are old. It's that pretty much nothing here belongs to a single story. You're sitting inside all of them at the same time. That's also why it doesn't feel like a hotel that got designed all at once in a conference room. It wasn't. This isn't a house we preserved. It's a house whose story is still ongoing. We just think of our time here as our turn in taking care of it.